So let's start learning some Python. But in the process of learning Python, we're going to learn a much broader skill, which is how to learn a programming language. So I have a system that I use for learning programming languages, and it's been helpful for me for learning a whole bunch of different languages. I'm going to take you through that today as we learn Python. Now, as we do this, I want to call out a couple of specific things because the strategy that I'm going to use differs a little bit from a lot of the tutorials that you'll see online. So, first of all, when I'm learning a programming language, I tend not to focus on memorizing the details of the syntax. The reason for that is that I know I'm going to pick up the syntax from reading example code and from writing my own programs. Also, since I haven't written this language before, I don't necessarily know yet which syntax I'm going to be using the most often, so I'd be at a high risk of spending a disproportionate amount of time learning structures I'm not going to use if I started with syntax. So let me give you an example. I use generics a lot in Java, in part because I find myself using Java in large or complex systems or extremely generalized libraries like the Spring Framework, which is a web framework for Java. But I don't find myself using generics that much in Swift, even though Swift has generics, because typically I use Swift for iOS client applications where each piece of code has a very specific use case. So when I teach Swift, I don't go over generics because I'd have to contrive an artificial situation to make them relevant. So the third reason I don't focus on syntax is that syntax is one of those things I can look up on demand with a search engine. When I need a case statement, I can Google the name of the language, case statement, and in most cases, the first result is going to tell me what I need to know. And then finally, syntax is a hard thing to accidentally mess up without realizing it. If the syntax is wrong, the program usually won't run. Compare that to if I make an inaccurate assumption about precedence in a language, and I think I'm assigning the result of an operation to a variable, but really I'm only assigning part of that operation, and then I'm finishing the operation on the assigned variable, and I'm throwing away the result, so now I have null, in a place where I don't think I should. Now, when I reference the variable later, I'm getting a null pointer exception or something, and I can't figure out why, because I'm looking at the line where I'm under the impression that I assigned the variable, and I'm just not understanding exactly what it does. Syntax doesn't usually hang me up on insidious problems like that. Those are subtler things about a language that I want to make sure that I have a grip on ahead of time to save myself from headaches later. So, instead of focusing on syntax, when I start learning a programming language, I ask a set of questions that gets to the crux of what I need to know. The set of questions focuses less on syntax and more on aspects of the language's organization and implementation. We'll get to what questions I ask in the next video, but I want to mention the third thing that I do in approaching a new programming language. I cement new information in memory by establishing a relationship between that new information and the stuff I already know. Now, when I'm learning a new programming language, here's what that means. I go through the programming language questions that I'm about to introduce to you, and as I do it, I compare my answers for the new language to the answers for a programming language that I'm more familiar with. By comparing the two languages, I can anchor the new knowledge about the new programming language to my existing knowledge about a different programming language. So today, we're going to assume that Python is your first programming language, and we'll only cover the questions with respect to Python. But if you also already know another programming language, I'd encourage you to answer the questions for that language as well, and then compare notes to see where the language you already know is similar to Python and where it's different.